You know, with this Flourish campaign and all of the construction, all the transformation taking place at the gardens, it really makes you think about history. Not just because the year that we're celebrating this is our 50th year at the gardens at York Street, but when you're tearing things down and building new things, you wonder if they'll last, if they'll stretch into the decades like our founders foresaw when they built the very beginning elements of this amazing place. I think about the conservatory and what it must have felt like when it opened for the first time. Just the waterways, so remarkable and telling such a profound story. It's important that we think about our past, and what you're about to see are some of the reflections, the memories of the key leaders that made Denver Botanic Gardens what it is today. Everything we're doing now is in honor of them, knowing that we have to take that torch to the next generation 50 years from now. Maybe they'll be thinking about, I wonder what they were thinking in 2009.
Our main goal was to get Denver Botanic Gardens. And so we got, in 1951, Quig Newton was the mayor, and he signed a letter to all of us after we got the corporation agreement. The original name of the Botanic Gardens was the Botanic Gardens of Denver Foundation Incorporated. So we later on changed the name to just plain Denver Botanic Gardens Incorporated.
I remember the first time I saw the gardens was in 1960 when the American Rose Society's convention was hosted by the Denver Rose Society. And Herb and I came from Hammond, Indiana to this convention, which we'd never been to a convention before. I can't believe I'd never been to a convention before. And when we were finishing up one of the tours, we came down the street and the bus driver said, well, this is Denver Botanic Gardens. We've been on a long tour. Do you want me to stop so you can go see it? And he paused the bus and we looked out and saw a flat landscape with some iris and a few things, and we said, no, and went back to the hotel. I had no idea that I'd be so involved with this precious piece of property all my life since then. But that was the first time I saw the gardens.
I moved to Denver in 1958, married a Denver girl in 55, joined the bank, United Bank at that time, now Wells Fargo. I remember I was at brunch one day at the Denver Country Club with my family, and a gentleman by the name of Bob Stern came up and asked me to step aside. He was a former chancellor, University of Denver, a very distinguished gentleman. And he said, Dick, we would be very honored if you would agree to be treasurer of the Denver Botanic Gardens. Well, I said, well, that's very flattering. Let me consider that. Now, I didn't have to consider it long because John Mitchell was the head over here, and John Mitchell was my boss at the bank. So it became very clear that I would say, certainly, Bob, I want to help any way I can. So I did become treasurer and was treasurer here for quite a period of time.
In February 1951, we had our first organizational meeting in Mrs. John Evans' home. Her name was Gladys Evans, and she was the president. We couldn't do anything immediately because we had no place for the gardens, and we were then finally assigned to the city park around the museum, and we started planting. But the trouble is, everything we'd plant would not last overnight. All the good stuff was picked up by the people who understood the plants. The exciting thing was moving over to this place. And we would inherit the land, which was completely bare.
I think one of the things that is interesting about the gardens is they don't really sit still, although they're on one piece of property. They have expanded into the help that they do and their work at Mount Goliath and at Chatfield. And here at the gardens, they've gone from the front of the property to the back, all along the streets, things like this, into the conservatory and the orchid bromeliad house. There's just always a new facet that can be involved. And it's great to see that they're not satisfied with just a bed of flowers.
It revolves around people a lot. There were some wonderful people, Marnie Hahn, Annie, Barbara Moore, Louise Campbell. These were all wonderful ladies active in the garden clubs and just working here day in and day out, trying to bring leadership to the gardens. Mrs. Waring was very instrumental to the gardens, and we had many meetings with her around, and she was a wonderful trustee. She was very generous. She, of course, gave us the Waring house, and we visited with her for many times. She was an important part.
One other thing was Mrs. Waring started Mrs. Waring's party. Wonder how that happened. And her idea was to bring together at one time the staff, the volunteers, and the trustees to build a more friendly relationship and provide a time where there was interaction with all these groups of people. And we always looked forward to Mrs. Waring's secret recipe eggnog. You could have it without, but it was always more interesting to have it with.
The interesting thing about that was that Mrs. Waring, Ruth Waring, lived in the house next to this house. And she and her mother used to sit upstairs when she was a girl and watch them dig up graves to move them out to a place near Goldman.
Well, if we start with the 60s and 70s, the fun part to me was it was a fun, genial place to be. You felt like everybody was your friend.
The gardens, I think, in the 70s were really in a growth area, a growth arena. The gardens were still sort of new. They needed development. We kept coming up with new schemes. We were always short of money. A good part of my career here has been fundraising. But it was just fun to see the gardens advance and move along on a very defined basis. We had the conservatory. Probably the Rock Alpine Garden was one of the next major developments over here, and a huge success for us.
The board came to us and said, we need to have this man hired to be curator of the Rock Alpine Garden we're going to build, but we don't have the money right now. Would you pay for his salary? And this was something we hadn't done before, really, to commit to an ongoing thing, but we did. And so for 3 years we paid Panayotti's salary, and it happened to first occur when I was president of the Associates. So Panayotti calls me his first boss.
One of the major breakthroughs was the SCFD, of course. And I would guess Ed Connors really drove that. He did a wonderful job in bringing that about from the garden standpoint. He was a leader there. And that has been of tremendous benefit to our city and to us, and it has allowed us to do a number of things that we might not have been able to do.
For a long time, Denver Botanic Gardens was known as the jewel of the Botanic Gardens through American Botanical Gardens Association. It was called the jewel of the gardens because it was so polished and had so much put into such a small amount of acreage. People go through here, I'm sure they think they've gone over 100 acres, and it's 22 acres if you count the parking lot.
But I had a sense that as unique as it is, with 23 acres, that's a pretty confining spot. But I became fairly well convinced that we were going to make a mark. We had the leadership and the drive, and we had the support from the city and county. We worked at that, but we got them to support us. And I knew we were in a competitive arena, and also nationally with other gardens. We're unique here between the Mississippi and the West Coast, so we've got a wonderful province. We really can dominate the Rocky Mountains. I mean, that is our territory. And so I kept thinking to myself, it's going to take one more step, one more step, one more step, one more fund drive, one more drive for endowments. But it's there, and we had the constituency, the people that wanted to support us, and so here we are.
I think now that we have a better idea of what gardens should be and do. And so I am happy with the present situation. But it was not what we pictured originally.
Very satisfying to think there's where we were. It used to be the Waring House, and now it's the Gates Center. All of these new facilities we have available to us, all of the new ones that are coming up. So it's exciting.
It was always something that you could be called on and you knew somebody would answer and come to help. It was a very friendly atmosphere. And I think that's what you remember most, is the friendships.
Thanks to all the pioneers that made Denver Botanic Gardens what it is today. Thank you for sharing your stories. We intend to hear as many stories as we possibly can. We're trying to blend the modern world with the world from 50 years ago, to take new technologies to tell the legends of DBG. And to do that, we really appreciate everyone sharing every story they can think of about our past. It'll help us make wise decisions in the future.